Headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Civil Service's main wish for 2024 has been revealed as a change of government. It could be helped by Sir Simon Clarke's angry article calling for the Prime Minister's replacement in today's Telegraph. Donald Trump now looks certain to be the Republican candidate after a strong victory in the New Hampshire primary. But my comments last week about Trump being better for Britain than Biden led to an interesting response from a fellow Tory, and we will be debating the virtues of two senescent men. Could the country be facing the return of Dad's Army? Well, the British Army Chief has warned MPs will have to mobilise the nation in the event of war with Russia. But with Gen Z taking an average of a day off every week for their mental health, surely the days of mass mobilisation are behind us. As I mentioned last night, to all viewers in Scunthorpe and the wider county of Lincolnshire, tickets are available for State of the Nation coming to Scunthorpe on the 1st of February. The registration fee is £1.50. You'll all be very welcome, and I look forward to seeing you then. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by a particularly pugnacious panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. As always, as you know, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that Sir Keir Starmer has claimed Rishi Sunak is being bullied by his own MPs today, with Prime Minister's questions dominated by accusations of Tory infighting. It's after Sir Simon Clarke wrote in the Daily Telegraph warning of an electoral massacre for the party unless there's a change of leader. The Prime Minister rebuffed the criticism, saying Labour doesn't understand Britain's values. But Sir Keir said the infighting had now descended into a soap opera.
Seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why Hizbut Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Rishi Sunak. Now, the deaths of two young girls and a woman in Norfolk are being treated as murder after a post-mortem revealed they all died from stab wounds. Officers found the bodies of the two young girls, Yasmin and Natasha Kuchenska, in a property near Norwich. Also found were two adults named as Bartlomiej Kuchenski and Kanticha Sukpen-Panau. Officers have referred themselves to the police watchdog after a call from a man expressing concerns about his mental state in a 999 call were ignored more than an hour before he and three others were found dead. A judge today has been urged not to pass a whole-life order on the man who stabbed three people to death in Nottingham. Valdo Kalakani pleaded guilty to manslaughter by diminished responsibility for killing students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as caretaker Ian Coates, in June last year. The 32-year-old also admitted trying to murder three pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. Sentencing began today and will conclude tomorrow. The government says it's committed to postal deliveries 6 days a week, despite a report by Ofcom suggesting that some days could be cut to save costs. Number 10 says the government will engage with the options outlined by the regulator, but insists deliveries on Saturdays will stay. Ofcom says it's vital the postal service is modernised to meet the evolving needs of consumers. And other options include slowing down deliveries, with most letters taking 3 or more days to arrive. And just lastly, in the United States, the woman challenging Donald Trump for her place in the Republican nominations has said the race is far from over after Donald Trump swept to victory in the New Hampshire primaries last night. Nikki Haley trailed second with almost 44% of the vote, while the former president took just under 55%. President Joe Biden secured a comfortable win for the Democrats. And in another twist, the Smiths guitarist Johnny Marr has hit out at the use of Smiths music being used at Trump rallies, hinting at legal action if it continues. That's the news on GB News, across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, Sir Simon Clarke sent off his piece to The Telegraph, and it appeared yesterday evening just as this programme was drawing to a close, and he made it clear that he doesn't think Rishi Sunak is the right person to lead the Conservative Party. Now, Simon is a really first-class individual. I worked very closely with him, actually, on Boris Johnson's campaign, which we won in the end and had a very distinguished leader as a result. But on this, he may be a good man, but he's not a wise man. The Tory party has already made itself look foolish by changing leader as often as some people change their shirts. That you cannot carry on having a new leader and getting further and further away from that mandate that we won in 2019. Seems to me that any new leader at this stage would have to go pretty much straight to an election. It's disrespectful to the voters to keep on changing leader and getting further from that mandate. But the electorate doesn't like parties that cannot make their mind up about what they're trying to do. Now, I didn't support Rishi Sunak for the leadership, as some of you may recall, but he won it, he's got it, and he is trying to do certain things which he set out clearly. What are they? Well, first of all, where he's having some success, to get the public finances in order. And that's been tough, and sometimes I've criticised him for the way he's done it, but actually it now looks as if there may be some money to cut taxes. So surely we should be giving him the chance to do that. That he's made changes, most importantly, to legal migration, so that the numbers there can begin to come down, as the British public wants to see. And we have to allow him the freedom to take the party into a general election so that you, the voter, can choose. You can decide what you want, what prognostication you want for our future, what policies you would like to see developed. And yes, I would like to see Rishi Sunak pushing more for conservative policies. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in a funny way, I mean, let Sunak be Sunak. Because I think the real Rishi Sunak is quite a true conservative believer. He believes in the small state. He admired the late Nigel Lawson. He wanted to be a chancellor in Nigel Lawson's mould. We've only got a few months to an election. The Tory party will be ruined if it is divided, if it squabbles amongst itself, if it changes leader once again. The polls are not currently very encouraging, but what we want is good conservatism and people to back the leader for the time being. Anything else is a distraction and makes it more likely that we get Keir Starmer, higher taxes, a bigger state and creeping Europeanisation. As ever, let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. But joining me now is my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. Kelvin, you've never been frightened to tell leaders when their time is up. Do you think Simon was right?
No, I don't. I think he's quite mad. I don't know. Actually, Number 10 have made it clear that he's always been a critic and never thought much of Richie and all the rest of it. Why he feels this would be appropriate right now is absolutely ridiculous. The idea that we'd end up with a fourth Conservative leader in a couple of years would, if we're 24 points behind, if the Conservatives are 24 points behind this morning, there will be 48 points behind by the middle of March. So you'd have to ask Sir Simon why he felt he had to do this, because it's nothing but damaging, and all kinds of the party, right, have all said it's a waste of time. What I'm so astonished about is that the guy is given any publicity at all on this. There are lots of people within the Conservative Parliamentary Party who don't feel well towards Rishi, and so he's an ex-cabinet guy. Why did the Telegraph even bother? The real reason they bothered is because there's a map which shows, they claim, under some rather spurious polling which has come out, which shows that it's all red under Rishi. Rishi goes and you put some right-winger in and it becomes all blue. I honestly, a great puzzle.
I wish that were true, but that's absolute nonsense, because if you put in a right-wing leader at the moment, that right-wing leader couldn't get anything through the House of Commons. The House of Commons has some dozens of One Nation MPs who would block it, and the ill will and the bad blood you would have would just prevent anything happening.
Yes, no, it's a huge error, and I wonder whether it's one of those people who tweet when they're drunk. They feel that actually they wish they'd never done it, and I wish he hadn't done it.
Well, he was certainly sober, but Tessa, you probably quite enjoy seeing the Tory party having a bit of internal fisticuffs.
Well, I don't know. I think it makes most of the nation feel exhausted. Already we're depleted by, dare I say it, the state of the nation, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I was travelling down the motorway today next to my elderly mother, who's seen way too many elections in her time, and she said, we're stuck with Rishi. Did you know he was head boy of Winchester? Impossible to believe, isn't it? So there she was, incredulous that he might have been a head boy at school, but nonetheless, there he is as our Prime Minister. But it made me think, if he was indeed head boy, and I checked, apparently he was, he knows all about discipline, and I would call in this Clark fellow and give him a proverbial six of the best, to be honest. You don't want boys behaving like that in your team. It's really, it's not good, and it undermines the idea, if I may say so, which we're constantly being told, that our system is not presidential, it's a party-led one, which is why we are meant to tolerate crazy ideas that Rishi's come up with, like, for instance, Rwanda and more drilling in the North Sea, because it's not Rishi, the president, it's the Conservative Party.
But we are becoming more presidential, aren't we? That people in a general election vote for a leader and a party. They don't vote for the individual candidate. I mean, I'm deluding myself. I think lots of people in North East Somerset voted for me personally.
Well, I was about to say, I thought with all the sort of cider...
You're the exception that proves the rule.
You're very kind.
The hazy sunsets. But the other grotesque error that I think the Conservatives are making more generally is that Keir Starmer's trampling right across the middle ground, fringing towards the right. I mean, he's backing all your foreign policy disasters up to the hilt. And it's extraordinary to me that rather than meet him in that middle ground and take him on, your former head boy is letting his party be dragged, scared of the impact of reform. And we know historically that all elections are won in the middle ground. All your crazies on either side, the fringe leaders, whether it's Michael Foot, Jeremy Corbyn, Michael Howard, they're a disaster in a general election.
Well, Calvin, I don't think Tessa's right about that. I think that actually you see across the world voters that are fed up with governments that are out of touch with them and aren't doing what they're wanting.
Actually, I mean, I don't know whether it's a danger to our country, but when you look across Europe right now, there is only one direction for leadership, and it is substantially to the right. And the leaders that currently exist, Hungary comes to mind straight away. I don't know whether they'd be good for our country or not, but I do know that when the Tories, as I imagine, are defeated at the next election, the Conservative Party will go very right, stay right, and at the end of 5 years of disaster of Labour, a hugely right-wing Conservative Party will be elected. So I don't agree with you about that.
Well, you cite Hungary, I could cite Poland, where you've got Mr Technocrat in charge now, who was a disaster for Britain and Brexit, as far as I was concerned, because he lacked so much charisma. What's he called?
Oh, I forget his name. He's tough.
Well, exactly. That is exactly the problem.
It's not Lech Walesa, I do know that.
But he won. He was former head of the European Council.
He only won because all the opposition parties joined up, even though they disagree with each other on lots of things, to try and defeat the incumbent and succeeded. That he didn't win because he was so popular, and he got fewer votes than the former incumbent.
But the idea that we are seeing only the populist right, and you're right, you can cite Italy and Hungary, and it saddens me.
Germany coming up. Germany coming up.
And France, Macron moving to the right.
Yeah.
Trying to reinvent himself.
Honestly, Tessa, across Europe, there is only one. And one of the problems is that you look at Modi, right? Now, he is tough. We would view him as of the right. And what we have is demagoguery really rampaging across the world and being seen to be successful.
And what saddens me is that the likes of Rishi feel they have to mosey up to some of this unpleasant politics.
There we go.
Clear blue water is what we want from the nasties.
Thank you to my panel. We like clear blue water. Coming up next, some Conservatives disagree with my suggestion that a Trump presidency would be better for Britain than a Biden one. But am I wrong? Plus, could the electric car market be running out of gas?
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing the attempted Tory coup, and you've been sending in your thoughts. Lucius, it's not too late. Either Suella, Jacob or Liz would win in a general election. Not entirely sure about that. Richard, Moggy, reform party, come on. You know it's the right thing to do for the benefit of the whole country. You could bring huge benefits. Don't waste your time with the Tories. And Jake, bring Boris back. The country could do with a good laugh. I'm not sure what to make of that. Thank you for your mailmogs, as always. So the New Hampshire primary result came in last night with, as expected, Donald Trump winning the second state of the Republican primary, gaining another 12 delegates, taking his total to 32. The only other contender, Nikki Haley, trails behind with 17 delegates. Now, more than 1,200 delegates are needed to win an overall majority, so theoretically there's a long way to go. But it's clear that the former president is by far the favourite. The real question is, what would a Trump second term mean for the UK? What is in our national interest? Personally, I think that a Trump presidency would be preferable to a Biden second term, not least because Trump actually likes the United Kingdom. I'm joined now by Lord Barwell, Gavin Barwell, former Chief of Staff to Theresa May. And, well, we've known each other for a long time. We campaigned together in 2010 when you were extremely helpful in getting me elected, for which many thanks. You were. But you think I'm wrong and that Biden is a better friend of the UK, better for the UK's interests?
Better overall for the UK's interests. There are some things that we'll disagree on, but there are three reasons why the Jacob Rees-Mogg that I think should have real reservations about supporting Donald Trump. The first is the rule of law, which I think all Conservatives should believe in. And we're dealing here with somebody who summoned a mob and unleashed that mob on the Capitol building, 170 police officers injured, was engaged in a scheme to set up slates of false electors from the states that had declared the results, tried to pressure his vice president into overturning the result. And the Jacob Rees-Mogg that I admired when I got to know you in 2010 was a passionate parliamentarian who believed in the importance of Parliament and the rule of law. And Donald Trump does not believe in those things. Even right now, today, he said that if he loses next time, it will only be because the election has been rigged. And his lawyers are busy arguing in court to say that a president should be able to do what they like and should not be prosecuted afterwards. They should be immune from prosecution. I don't think that's what I think you believe in.
Well, the US has a constitution that makes provision for a president to be brought to account, which is their impeachment system. And Trump was impeached both as president and after he ceased to be president. Now, admittedly, for party political reasons, that did not succeed, but that is their constitutional system. And I don't think having your head of state accountable to your parliament is an unreasonable system.
No, so I think if evidence comes to light when you're the president, then there is, as you say, a constitutional process for doing that. But lots of evidence has come to light since he ceased being president. But his lawyers, actually, as you know, his lawyers argued in court that if a president assassinated their political opponent, and the evidence of that only came to light after they'd stopped being president, so they couldn't be impeached, they should be immune from prosecution. You don't believe that,
well,
sure?
That's a matter the US courts will have to decide.
But you don't believe that.
I think that if a US president is impeached and the impeachment fails, that is an end of it for that purpose. And he was impeached on the events of the 6th of January after he'd ceased to be president. So I certainly believe that you shouldn't have double jeopardy. But let's come to Trump's policies, because, look, there are elements of Trump's character that I don't think would work in a British political context and that I wouldn't claim to be easy with.
It's good to hear.
But look at what he got right in foreign policy, the Abrahamic Accords being particularly important, understanding that Iran was dangerous, that the desperate Obama-Iran deal that actually helped Iran and allowed money to go into Iran, he got rid of. He got those big policy decisions right. His extraordinary tax-cutting budget, which energised the US economy, has made the US much more prosperous in the last few years than either we've been or the EU has been. He's been a successful domestic and foreign affairs president, whereas Biden just hasn't.
So I think it's a mixed bag in both cases. So if I take the three things you said, Abraham Accords, yes. Iran, I think it's a more nuanced argument, but he was certainly right about Syria, where Obama failed to act, and he did. And on the tax cuts, the tax cuts are good, but they weren't paid for, and they just pushed up the deficit. So I'm a great believer in cutting taxes, but they've got to be paid for. I think Biden also has some clear successes. But let me take a second issue that I care very passionately about, Ukraine. American aid for Ukraine has dried up. And it's dried up because MAGA Republicans, not the whole Republican Party, but the Trump-supporting wing of the Republican Party is not supporting it. And he is saying very clearly that he doesn't want to carry on paying for something that's thousands of miles away. Now, I think you care about Ukraine. You care about who wins this war. Trump is not the right candidate to secure that.
Unpredictability in foreign affairs had remarkable successes because people thought he might do things that others would not do. And this unconventional approach has served him quite well. I think it's inconceivable that Trump would effectively surrender to Putin. That would offend everything that Trump believes about himself, let alone the interests of the United States. But the fact he wants to do things differently, I mean, he did a lot on NATO, but in the end he backed NATO, having said that he wouldn't. And I think you get that from Trump. You get this unpredictability so that your opponents don't know where to move.
So I think it's very optimistic at best and possibly naive of you to believe this is all a bluff. Right now, his supporters in Congress are the American aid has run out. There is no American money now flying to Ukraine, and the people that back Trump in Congress are the ones blocking the next package.
Up to points. There are only a small number of Republicans in Congress who are blocking it, and they've tied it into other things.
The House Republicans are refusing to vote on the aid package.
But they're not all Trump supporters. No, the House Republicans are refusing to back it because they want Biden to do other things, and this is the complete routine of US politics.
Yeah, it's a
the administration,
routine.
But it is how US politics works, regardless of Trump.
But he is encouraging that. His rhetoric and what he's saying is encouraging that. And you and I think agree on Ukraine. We agree on the importance of Ukraine.
Exactly. But the executive in the US tries to do something, and it has to get the agreement of Congress by compromising on things that, in our political world, are completely irrelevant.
Do you agree that if he came out today,
what's going on.
If he came out today and said House Republicans should vote for the Biden aid package, it would go through?
No, I don't.
Yeah, see, I think it would.
No,
I don't think
it would. Because he's not actually that popular with all the House Republicans.
Not all of them, but most of them are MAGA, and he is the presumptive nominee now. I agree with you. Whatever
he's likely, yes.
I agree with you
he's
that he's likely to be the
win.
candidate. Let me give you a third issue that, I think it's something that people on you and I on different wings of the Tory party agree on: free trade. At the moment, Donald Trump is saying in his manifesto that he is going to impose tariffs on all imports into the United States. Now, you and I both believe in a more free trading world, which gets rid of these barriers to trade.
I don't think either president will give the UK a free trade deal. I don't think that's likely to happen.
I agree.
Trump's approach to trade has been a very aggressive one, ultimately to open trade rather than to close it down, and he's taken an aggressive approach to try and get rid of the barriers that other people have. But I want to come to Biden, because Biden's record of being anti-Britain goes back to the 1980s, when he tried to stop extradition treaties of IRA figures. Now, that never seems to have changed. That view of the UK and his view of himself as Irish seems to have been stuck in a sort of 1970s, 1980s event that he's never got away from, and that he is not, therefore, fundamentally on our side.
So I don't agree with that, although I see why you feel it. I mean, I'd actually point you to the article that your friend Boris wrote, where he described Biden as a friend of Britain. What I think Biden is...
But a former Prime Minister and a Prime Minister can't be rude about a US President. I have a greater...
I'm not sure if Boris is always diplomatic.
I have a greater freedom.
So let me say why I have some sympathy with you. I think it is true that President Biden identifies himself as Irish. And I think
he's about as Irish as I am, actually, but that's not... But I am quite Irish,
important in these things, right? How you feel is important. And whether you feel it's fair or not, I think he was very concerned about what he perceived to be the Johnson and Truss governments, the way they were approaching the Northern Ireland Protocol and the implications that would have on Ireland. So he was definitely not helpful to the British government on that issue. But I don't think it follows from that he's not overall a friend of the United Kingdom. And I take some comfort that Boris, who's not necessarily an ideological soul-minded man, said what he said in that article.
Thank you very much for coming on. I hope you'll come back again, because these discussions are so interesting.
Very good
Thank you, Gavin. Coming up, in a world in which the young generation takes a day off every week, on average, for their mental health, how can we expect conscription to work? Plus, some news that could drive the electric car lobby round the bend.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much. Radio.
Welcome back. We've been discussing the relentlessness of Donald Trump's charge to regain power, and you've been sending in your views. Dave says, Jacob, Trump as president would be better for the world. And Peter, Jacob, do you disagree with Donald Trump's policies? Get men out of women's sports, stop critical race theory, finish the wall, cut taxes, cut regulations, deport all illegal immigrants and stop the green agenda. Well, no, most of that sounds pretty sensible. Patrick Sanders, the British Army chief, in a speech at the International Armoured Vehicles Exhibition in London, has suggested that there is a serious prospect of the need to mobilise the nation as geopolitical tensions continue to heighten. However, what would conscription look like in modern Britain? Well, new analysis has shown the average young employee loses 60 productive days at work owing to health concerns, nearly twice as many as those who are over 50. Seems things have changed since the 1940s, and we don't quite have the stiff upper lip population we once did. Well, my panel is still with me, Kelvin Mackenzie and Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, conscription, do you think this is realistic in 21st century Britain?
Well, I don't think we're talking about conscription today. Conscription, when it first reared its head pre-Roberts introduced the idea of it, pre-World War I, wasn't immediately embraced. We didn't introduce conscription until 1916. The meat grinder on the Western Front had been chewing through so many men that we were forced to have to conscript them. Just quickly on the point of, the young being more prone to mental health and sick days, etc. I wrote Bletchley Girls, and I did a lot of extensive research with the extant veterans. And interestingly, all the research that they did at Bletchley Park during the war said that women, because it was mainly women who worked there, in middle age were tougher than the young ones in terms of sick days. The younger girls had more sick days than us tough old girls in middle age.
Well, a young lady like you must therefore be taking lots of days off. Kelvin, one thing I've always been struck by is that New Zealand, without conscription in the First World War, sent a greater proportion of its population than we did with conscription.
Really?
And that, therefore, conscription isn't necessarily the answer to the military's prayers.
OK, so our army is basically halved in the last 30 years, right? We're down to around 70,000 or a bit more than that. And the point that the general was making was that we will either need conscription or we will need some kind of reservist force. And the other generals that have been chipping in on this argument have pointed out we can't get people to be reserves.
No one's joining. That's the problem.
Nobody is joining. And the idea that young people I'm talking about the under-25s, although conscription would actually apply to around about 18 to 60. So those of you watching right now, this isn't something that just applies to your grandchildren. You'll be cannon fodder as well. Is that it is preposterous. The main thing that stresses people today is whether their phone network can be switched easily, or that they can buy whether they can buy a cheaper broadband.
But
I don't believe that we are, as a country, have the same views of political views, for instance, intensity. We must fight for Ukraine. Right? I notice on my Twitter that the Ukraine issue gets less likes and less connection than anything else. It's the most important war in Europe and really affects us. I don't believe that our young people actually feel fired up about anything except whether their Instagram picture looks any good.
I don't think it's entirely fair to blame our young people who have been the product of a predominantly peaceful post-war legacy since 1945. Yeah. We have been allowed to indulge in the self, in Instagram, in liberty, precisely because we have not been at full-scale war. And that's what I found so disingenuous about the way in which we began our support for the Ukrainian war. We flirted with that country. The EU flirted with it. NATO flirted with it. Hey, come play with us. Totally underestimated the darn right ugly thuggery of Putin and refused point blank to put boots on the ground.
Okay,
and we all know, and we're doing it with the Houthi now. We'll do a little bit of firing from the distance.
We have trained up 30,000, this is in our country, come to our country, 30,000 Ukrainians on a 5-week course, which we then sent back with knapsacks, and they then went back to their units, right? We have done a hell of a lot.
It's not enough, and it was never going to be enough.
This is thanks to our army training. So big thumbs up to the army so far. But the issue that we face is that we've now got everybody talking about that what's happening to the Ukraine right now. I'm not saying they're going to come on boats across the channel, but I am saying that if they succeed in the Ukraine, and I feel very uneasy about this, where next? Is it Poland? Is it Estonia? What is going to happen? Right. We are at some stage either going to... we have done a fantastic amount of sending arms. We're number 2 in that area. Where are the Germans? Oh, it's coming. Oh, when? Oh, French? Oh, don't talk to us, matey. We want to have clean hands for the peace, right? All that load of old tosh, right? We are a great country, right? But we are going to, one day, are going to be firing missiles back.
I happen to agree with you. We need to prioritise Ukraine. Don't ever underestimate the Russians, how big they are and how cheap life is in Russia. They will keep throwing their men into the meat grinder. We have got to keep our united front, and we need to keep our focus on that front. So we need to insist on a peace fight in Israel, because it's distracted us, it's distracted the press, and now we're wasting our precious money and resources pointlessly firing at the Houthi. We need to stick with Russia.
I don't agree
Eliminate,
with that.
Yes, we do. I'm sorry. What we've done is we've split the world's attention, and also we've undermined that idea of the right water fight. Ukraine is the right water fight. The Middle East is a far darker, murkier affair, and we have been equivocal at best.
Right. Did you see tonight that Israel's economic minister has just said that there is a very good chance that Israel are planning to fire missiles at Iran, right? And at that, by the way, I would be... his point is bloody good. His point is, he said, they cannot sleep... we can't sleep at night because of their proxies. They're not going to sleep at night. It's a very, very good point. And so we're in a massively dangerous world, and we have got to do something. I mean, that general was also making the other point that we don't put enough money in.
We don't want the Middle East to spiral out of control. Our behaviour there at the moment is encouraging precisely that. We don't want to build up...
Country.
Even Jacob Rees-Mogg is agreeing with me. Is that not a nod of agreement?
It's a nod, actually, that we've got to move on, but you were making a very forceful point, as always, because in other news, the marvellous Daily Telegraph writer and frequent GB News guest Alison Pearson has, in her typically acerbic fashion, perhaps given the Conservative Party press team its best idea yet. I mean, this is the best idea since my mother worked in the Conservative Party press office in the early 1960s. Pasting this picture of Sir Keir Starmer taking the knee to the BLM neo-Marxist mob all over the country at the next election So the question is, will this picture come back to haunt Sir Keir Starmer? Kelvin, it's a great picture, isn't it?
It's a fantastic picture, taken, I think, about 4 years ago, I think, on the death of the chap in the United States, and very sad that was, and that police officer got a massive sentence, and quite right too. The question is, are we going to be taking the knee to every minority that feels that they have had a poor life? Right, because if they're going to do that, they should do it for white people, because the white poor are the biggest disadvantage of any minority in our country. And so I believe that was a mistake. And were it to happen today, knowing Starmer, he wouldn't do it, would he?
And Tessa, Black Lives Matter turns out to be a deeply sinister organisation. It was arguing for defunding the police, it's neo-Marxist, and then it turned out to be anti-Semitic. So it's been found out, and people who took the knee to it should be ashamed, shouldn't they, by that association? Did you take the knee?
I've never publicly taken the knee, no, because there wasn't an occasion or a platform in that moment. But Gareth Southgate, we've turned into a national hero, and him and his football team regularly take the knee. And I think to undercut Keir Starmer for taking the knee in that moment, it was after George Floyd's funeral, I think the day of George Floyd's funeral, in the moment saying he stood against, black, anti-black, he was opposing anti-black racism.
But he wasn't, he was supporting Black Lives Matter.
Well, no, he said he was taking the knee in opposition to anti-black racism. I wrote it down, and I'm quoting what he said.
Yeah, but he was using the symbol of a neo-Marxist organisation.
No, I don't think we can credit
paint himself...
Black Lives Matter with taking the knee. That's to embolden Black Lives Matter. No, they use the
when it's quite clear, it is based on colour, right? So there's no ifs and buts about that. My issue about that is, would the leader of the Lib Dems, would he do it? Would a Conservative leader, would a One Nation Tory do it? The answer is no, because if we're going to start taking the knee about that, why don't we take the knee? I know you feel strongly about Gaza. Why don't we take the knee for Palestinians?
I think the Tory MP for Newbury took the knee. I might stand corrected on that, but I think she did.
I'm glad you brought that up, because what's interesting about Keir Starmer, sometimes it feels like he does a bit of a pick and mix. What works for him in the moment? I can't understand why he is literally the Conservative Party's echo chamber on our foreign policy in the Middle East. It is extraordinary. In the last 24 hours, we've seen...
Should he take the knee for Gaza, for Palestinians?
I presume what you're meaning is, should he call for a ceasefire?
Everybody is oppressed in some way in this world, aren't they?
Well, they sure are in Gaza at the moment, even in a UN shelter.
What about old people? Take the knee for Kelvin.
No. You're not very oppressed, and I'm not very oppressed, and I don't think Tessa's too oppressed.
We're not oppressed. I mean, you're being glib, and you're actually undercutting institutional racism that Keir Starmer, as a lawyer, and he's seen most of our migration law that was introduced in the 60s and 70s was actually
But this whole concept of institutional racism is nonsense, isn't it?
No,
that
it's
only
not.
Individuals can hold views. You can't attract views to institutions.
I don't think,
it's individuals that matter. And this is basic socialism. You attach an opinion to a collective because you don't want to tackle the problem of opinions held by individuals.
I don't. My uncle was a commander in the Metropolitan Police at the time of Stephen Lawrence, and he admitted to me there were serious issues in the police
individuals.
Force. No, not with individuals.
And the police force was incompetent.
But not with individuals. About the idea that there could be men, not only men, police men and women high up who would pull over, and I've heard this from the horse's mouths, pull over an impressive car, say a BMW with a black guy in it, on the assumption that just because he's black, he'll be up to no good with that.
But that's the individual.
No, but it's not.
Individuals behave badly. You have to stop the individual. When you say it's institutionalised, you make the problem easier. You put it away. You've got to deal with the individual.
But the point is the institution's facilitating that kind of thinking,
I would think it was being a police officer in London today must be an absolute nightmare, where crime is rampaging.
All right. OK, we've got to move on. But mentioning the police, it's time for me to say how marvellous the police at the Palace of Westminster are, and many of them watch this programme. So if you're watching and you're on duty at the Palace, thank you, and thank you to my panel. We'll see them next week. Coming up, more doom and gloom for the eco-lobby as smart meters and electric cars face yet another collision with reality. Plus, parliamentary procedure, a development of niche interest to the cognoscenti.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The March of the Green Agenda may be getting trenched foot as more concerns have arisen today for 2 of its favourite projects, electric cars and smart meters. The chairman of the Japanese car giant Toyota, Akio Toyoda, has said he expects electric cars will only ever reach about 30% of the market share, in spite of huge industry investments. Speaking at an employee Q&A session, he went on to explain that the development of electric vehicles should not be at the expense of hybrid and hydrogen technology. This isn't the first time an industry boss has said something to this effect. Last year, the UK boss of Kia said he didn't expect a mass-market electric car product could be expected owing to huge battery costs. But perhaps in even more extraordinary news, a Money Mail investigation has revealed the extent of the problems posed by smart meters, which include people being billed for energy used by properties hundreds of miles away. And we can only imagine the customer service battles that would follow. Well, joining me now to discuss smart meters is the energy expert and consumer champion, Will Hodgson. Will, thank you for coming back in.
Hello, Jake.
Smart meters are being sold on the idea that you'll be able to work out how much you're spending, and therefore you'll have more control. But it also gives control at the other end, doesn't it, which may be more problematic.
Well, it's worth setting out exactly what a smart meter purports to do. So first of all, if you have a smart meter in smart mode, we'll explore this later, in smart mode, you are sending updated readings automatically to your supplier. Now, what that means is they cannot charge you based on an estimate of your usage. I have to say, Jacob, energy companies tend to estimate high. Left to their own devices, they'll probably charge you too much, which is why, at this moment in time, British customers have about £8 billion in credit balances sitting with their energy supply. Those don't have smart meters. Now, the problem is, if a smart meter is not in smart mode, the smart meter goes into dumb mode. At that point, you're relying on manual transmission, inputting of data, and even database migrations. And that's where we've seen errors here.
OK, but actually, I can read my meter, I can send it in online. It takes 2 seconds. It's really easy to send your electricity or gas company an up-to-date meter reading if you want to.
Well, if that were right, we wouldn't have £8 billion of our money sitting with our suppliers right now.
But isn't that partly because of low interest rates and people didn't mind having these deposit balances, and that actually the deposit balances are part of the structure of the energy market, and if they didn't have that money from customers, they'd have to get it from somewhere else, and prices would go up because you'd have £8 billion on which you'd be paying now 5% interest, and that would have to feed through to prices. So it's a mechanism for funding energy usage.
Well, what you're talking about there is a mechanism which is a loan. But if it's a loan, then customers should be paying interest rates. I'm afraid there's only one way to look at it, which is if you let your energy supplier estimate your usage, they will overestimate, which is why a smart meter can prevent that happening. It protects you from the overestimate.
Don't you build up a credit even with a smart meter? Because lots of people like to spread their energy costs over the course of the year and pay a set amount each month rather than the amount they've used each month, to build up a credit in the summer and draw on it in the winter. And that has advantages for customers and indeed the companies because they have this extra cash flow.
Yeah, well, that's what's done in agreement with customers.
That's right.
What we're seeing for the most part is people who find they had thousands of pounds in some instances with their supplier precisely at the time of year when they really could have used it the most. That is not above board.
But you're assuming people are completely stupid and don't do things in their own interest. All they need to do is put a reading in and they'll get it back to where it ought to be, and they'll get a cheque back from the electricity board.
I'm assuming not that people are stupid. I'm assuming that energy companies are quite cynical. Let's not forget about 40 energy companies went out of business in 2020, 2021. Why? Because they ran out of cash. So what would they do if they've got some leeway based on how they want to estimate your bill, because they don't have a smart meter in place? They're going to estimate high, which is why a smart meter protects you.
But your cash is protected. You don't lose your cash if your energy company goes bust in that sense, and it's important to reassure people about that. The other thing on smart meters is that they can change their prices very quickly because they know exactly what's going on. Now, currently, electricity companies, when there's a shortage of electricity, are offering people cash to switch things off. If they can do that, they can do the reverse, and they can have surge pricing like Uber has. And it seems to me the reason I won't have a smart meter is that I'm quite happy to send in my meter readings. I'm quite happy to have a set price all day long because I think that because we haven't built enough capacity, we've been short on nuclear capacity, we haven't got the gas back up, we've closed down our coal stations. In cold days, we are quite close to reaching capacity. At that point, surge pricing would be a very effective way of getting people to turn off their electricity.
So there's so much speculation in this space. That's why you don't want to get a smart meter. Let me tell you 2 reasons why I do. Because it's important to pull on the hard data, the facts, the study, the research. The first one is around energy efficiency. So the whole idea with smart meters was not just to protect you from being overbilled by an unscrupulous supplier. It's also when you can see what you're using, you might turn off this appliance, turn on that one. That means people have, it's been shown, saved about 3% on their energy, gas and electricity both. Now that adds up to about £50 per household, but maybe if you've got a bigger house, £150. That's real money, and people should not be denied the chance to have it. The second key fact about smart meters is you're quite right. When you can show what time of day you've used your energy, you have the chance to have a different price. Now, what I've just heard there is speculation. The fact is there's only one price incentive. There's only one price incentive that's been shown so far, and that is people being offered up to £100 a year to move their energy off peak.
Yeah, absolutely, but that's
never the other way, Jacob. No, this is speculation. You're badgering against the facts that we've seen over the last year.
But this is why when they're trying to sell them to people. People, when they're selling something, always offer you the favourite term first, don't they? So you get 3 months free, and then you're hooked into it. Seems to me that's what's happening.
Well, there's an interesting angle on this, Jacob, because I've dug deep into smart meters as a consumer champion, looking for ways to reduce bills. And what I found, it's actually fascinating. It comes down to demand for energy at a given point in time. Now, why is it that British Gas might offer you £100 a year if you move your energy usage from peak to off-peak? It's because right here, when it's off-peak, there's the wind blowing, no one using it, it's cheap. But here's the thing, not only is it cheaper there, you leave it cheaper for everyone else because you aren't using it at peak times as well. Everyone wins.
Thank you very much, Will. And finally, I couldn't help but mention some important parliamentary procedural news. When the Prime Minister appointed Lord Cameron as Foreign Secretary, it disgruntled, or at least less than gruntled, prompting many MPs, prompting claims that it was improper, which is nonsense. The appointment and the process was well within constitutional norms. But today, the House of Commons Procedure Committee has proposed that Lord Cameron should face questioning from MPs in the Commons from the bar of the House at the end of the chamber rather than the dispatch box. The bar, incidentally, was given as the gift of Jamaica when the House of Commons was rebuilt after the bombing during the war, and that the dispatch box should remain reserved for MPs. There's precedent for this. Lord Chatham, Pitt the Elder's son and heir, answered questions at the bar in 1809. It's never previously been done to hold a minister to account on daily business. He was being called to account by a committee. Anyway, Mail Mogg, if you think this is a good idea and are reassured by the precedent. But that's all from me. Up next is Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare tonight?
Well, Shamima Begum's lawyer is going to stand to be an MP. Is the Labour Party going to fall victim to the pro-Palestine vote? There is a secret backbench plot to change your party rules, Jacob, in order to oust Rishi Sunak. I'll be revealing all of that. And Harry, of course, is living it up on the red carpet with an anti-monarchist while his family are lying in hospital beds. What a world.
Well, that's all going to be very interesting. I'm fascinated. You know so much more about the inner workings of the Conservative Party.
I think I'll just come on telly and say it, Jacob.
No, nobody tells me about these things. Anyway, that's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And remember, for those of you in the county of Lincolnshire, come to the People's Forum on the 1st of February. Tickets, registration £1.50, and the weather in Somerset will be simply fantabulous.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Thursday's going to be another mild day, quite a cloudy one though, with rain particularly across western areas. That's as this weather front is approaching throughout tonight from the south and west. It's a warm front, so it will bring milder air, and ahead of it we do have a ridge of higher pressure, so that's settling things down. So a clear and crisp evening for many northern and eastern areas. We'll see some mist and fog starting to develop, low cloud on the hills as well, and it will be a chilly night for many northeastern areas. We could see a touch of frost by tomorrow morning. However, further south and west, quite a different story with rain and cloud arriving and temperatures much milder by morning than they will be through this evening. And that milder, cloudy, gloomy feel will push northwards through the day. So plenty more cloud around through tomorrow with drizzly rain coming and going, particularly across western areas, persisting across the north of Scotland. More southeastern areas will stay largely dry, but you couldn't rule out some drizzly rain from time to time. But everywhere we'll see this southerly breeze bringing that milder air, so another fairly mild day for the time of year on Thursday.